I love that attitude.
Got it. Okay.
Let's
I think,
just go. Hi, Peter. Krask.
hi,
It's
Meredith.
so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Meredith. Thank you for having me today.
It's lovely to meet someone who is a creativity guide, which
Thank
is
you. It's nice to be met.
which is both your business and I imagine just sort of your identity in life as well.
One of them, yes, but a very significant one,
Can
and
you
one I
tell
very much love. So,
can you tell me a little bit about how what led you to this world?
sure. How much time do we have, Jack? Do you want the
We
short or long
have
version?
time. We have
Okay.
time.
Um, the short version is I hit a pretty big wobble professionally early in middle age, and one that was sort of needed and necessary, but also, still deeply uncomfortable, and which kicked my ass 6 ways to Sunday. But um, and as I was casting about, sort of for what was the thing, I was talking to a friend, and they're like, "What's something you could start tomorrow that wouldn't cost you any money that you do?" And I realized I am the person that all of my creative friends come to when they're working on a project and they're stuck, or they have 10 ideas and they don't know how to get started. And I'm always able to get them where they want to go and help them move that work forward, of whatever kind of work it is, and get them there in a way that they're making the thing they want to make, rather than like, here's the thing I think you should do. Because
Mm.
generally, when we work with coaches or other people, it sometimes can turn into that conversation of like, this is what you really should be doing.
Or what you think the audience wants.
Right. Versus what is the thing you're actually trying to do. And I was like, that's it. That's the answer. Because I've worn so many hats professionally. And for the longest time, I really sort of struggled with that because I never really fit in a box. I trained as a writer. That's what I went to graduate school for. Worked as a journalist, was a teacher, fell into an accidental career as a very fancy she floral designer for 20 years. Did a lot of work in live television, theater. And I realized sort of that, for a long time, like I would go to a network meeting and people would be like, what do you do? And I didn't really know what to tell them, or they'd give me kind of the stink eye when I didn't have like the snappy answer. And, but I realized sort of the through line in all of this is process, and working with process, whether that's, with my own creative work, or being part of, a big live television production, which is this huge machine and so many parts and so many hands, and really having to understand how that machine works, and yet still get to some sort of creative outcome that works for a lot of people. And that's always been my great love, is process, and sort of getting from here to there and A to B. And with that, I started work as a dedicated mentor at the New Museum in New York. And they have a program called New Inc., where they take up to 80 members a year and give them a workspace, training, and each project, whether that's an individual or a team, also gets their own mentor for a year of their residency to just kind of guide them through their project. And not all of them are artists. There's a lot of tech people there. There's a lot of city planners, social justice, community engagement. So they're working at things from a whole variety of angles. And, you sort of get matched with a project for a year. So I've had to really kind of be able just to be like, okay, let's go. I may not know anything about this specific work, but let's be together and figure this out. And I learned that I was able to do that and get people where they wanted to go and sort of just really engage with the process. So it's great fun and very satisfying and just makes me very happy.
I love your insight around process being the core element that goes through it all.
Yeah.
Where do you see, I imagine that you see patterns as you work with
Mhm.
people at stages in which people get snagged in their own processes. Like, how do you identify where those snags are happening, or how do you dig in to understand how to
Well,
help?
usually there's a couple common things. Many people I work with, and again, they're not all artists, many of them are entrepreneurs, but they're all in a moment of transition and um, wanting to either take their current knowledge and turn it into another form or move into something new altogether and sort of not sure what in their experience prepares them to go in a different direction. And the main commonality, and this is not kind of like the lightning bolt insight, but it really is true. They have the answer already. They know how to do it. And it really is more a question of helping people understand that they have that answer. An example I like to use from a client, she was a professional organizer and she had this really interesting way that she worked with clients. And she was kind of the anti-Marie Kondo in that her approach was very forgiving and sort of very rooted in the fact that your life is always changing, therefore your stuff is changing, and what worked for you at one time may not work now. And she was writing a book. She wanted to write a book about her method and sort of what that was, but she said she didn't know how to do it. She'd never written a book before. She wasn't a writer, sort of all of those things. But as we were working on it together, what I kept pointing out to her was like, this is exactly what you do in your job, right? You have a story, somebody has a story in their home, and you are teaching them sort of what's essential in that story and how to pull out what isn't or what doesn't work, which is exactly what writing is, and editing, and sort of, really honing in on a vision through multiple drafts. So she may not have had this sort of one kind of skill, but for the heart, the most important skill, she had it and she knew how to do it. And it was just a question of really sort of shifting her belief about that, that this was a process she just engages in her everyday life, and that it was just in a different form that she wasn't as familiar with or didn't quite recognize. And I think that's pretty true across the board, for most people. And it's really kind of teaching them in a way their own process and helping them understand that they do have a process, because there's so many, and I have nothing against them. I'm not slamming them, but there are so many books about creativity and like, this is how to do it, and this is the creative path, and follow these steps and you will get there. And if they help, wonderful. And I find, there's things in them that work for some people, but I often find that also freaks people out, or they feel bad, or like, well, it's not working for me, so it must be me,
And
rather
it's
than
not a one size fits all, right?
right.
That's the
Absolutely.
biggest thing, is it's a more
Yeah.
of a mindset than anything else,
Right.
or a new way of looking at things, which it sounds like you're really great at helping people do.
Right.
I'm wondering how much of your, so I work with I am lucky enough to get to work with somebody who researches creativity. She's at
Mhm.
Yale. Her name's Zorana Pringle. And she taught me, she's writing a book on creativity right now from sort of an academic perspective, but
Uh-huh.
she taught me that there are these stages of creation and creativity, and that frustration is a core element of the
Absolutely.
creative process, and
Yeah.
that pushing through frustration is crucial to sort of moving into that new stage of creativity. And I'm curious how much of your time is spent trying to help people move through their emotions around this work. Like, is it entangled or?
That's definitely part of it. And I think, I want to, be clear too. I mean, I suffer from it too when I'm working on my own projects. There's always that moment where you're just like, what am I doing? Like I've kind of lost the whole thing. Or, every time you try to get your arms around it, it morphs into something else. But what it is, I think, even more than frustration, it's just people get spooked for a couple reasons. One of which is they feel like they don't know how to do it, and therefore something is wrong. When in fact, you don't know how to do it, because that's part of making things, right? Is not only do you have to make it, you have to figure it out at the same time. You have to figure out how to make it at the same time. So I always feel like, well, why, how would you know? Like, and you have experience and things that work and processes that are familiar to you, but each project you are sort of starting from scratch in a way. And it's going to need its own particular rules and systems. So it's more about, I think, helping people sort of stay in that space and not be freaked out, because, and I think particularly for people who are in a transitional mode, or, moving from one kind of knowledge to another, because of our society, that we're supposed to get a result quickly. And they start getting panicky, like something's wrong with me because I'm not getting this answer quickly. When in fact, a project that's really coming from you takes time, and it takes time to sort of surface. And so I look at it as kind of, like we're in the cave together, and I'm the person who's there in the cave with you, saying like, I know the cave, I know how to be in the cave, and I'm going to teach you how to be in the cave. And if you bump your head, I've got bandages, you'll be okay. And, then you can start finding your way around. And I think it really is just that, teaching people to be comfortable in that in-between phase, because that's where most people give up, right?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Do you ever have to help people let go? And I ask this from personal experience, which is I published my first book last year.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you. And I started thinking about it 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And I met with my friend who is also my agent, and talked about it with her, and found myself just sort of, the ideas were getting too big really fast, like too ambitious, wanting to take multi-country studies of anxiety and understand the world. It just got really big really fast. And I actually had to step away from it for 4 years. I didn't even think of it that way. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to step away from it for 4 years. I just thought, I'm too close, I have to let go.
Right.
I'm going to give it time. And when it came back, it was very formed. It was strange. It was like, here it is, it's ready to go. And it moved very quickly. So I'm curious about that, how you've experienced that with people.
I think that's very common. And I would say that both, again, as somebody who makes things and as somebody who helps people who make things. And I generally, when you're at that stage where it is too big and you've got like 4,000 ideas, it just means it's not ready, or that you haven't thought it through yet. And you intuitively, instinctively, absolutely did the right thing, which is let it sit and let it marinate, because then it does start to take form. And as you're out and about in the world and engaging with you, because you're still engaging with those questions, it's not like it just disappears. And it is taking shape. And part of that is a kind of, I don't know, is it faith? Is it trust? I'm not sure what the right word is, but you have to be willing to let it sit.
It's really interesting, because it's almost like I don't know. I don't know if these words even right, but it's like allowing your subconscious,
right,
keep
absolutely,
like working at it, and you may not even be aware that that's
right.
happening. And you're right, that's why that is faith, because
Yeah.
you're not actively working on it at all.
Yeah. And it's, it's hard, because something about that idea is clearly exciting, and it's sort of like, you are kind of champing at the bit to go, but it just may not be ready, and you may not be ready. And I think that's part of this process too. And, one thing I try to work with people is, again, we're so pressured to get sort of fast results.
Mhm.
And in America in particular, if you're not producing or getting a result right away, then something's wrong. But, the really good idea, the really big one, and the one that's closest to your heart is the one that takes time. And to speak to your experience too, when you were ready, then it kind of went, right?
Amazing. I mean,
And
just so surprised. It was so fast. I
yeah,
mean, it was like the thing was fully formed. I almost felt like I wasn't doing it. Like I
right.
was just like passing it through. I mean, I know Elizabeth Gilbert talks about that a lot, but
Yeah,
it's sort of like the flow state feeling, but it's
yeah.
nothing you can, it doesn't feel like anything you can chase, which does make it very difficult.
No, and that's the heart. I mean, that's, this is one of the sort of mysteries of creativity is there is that balance of sort of, you have to show up and you have to sort of be ready and wanting to work, and working. But at the same time, you also have to be willing to let something be and listen. And I think that is one of the challenges people face most often is that listening question. Um, because for instance, like I think you're a meditator, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So you've had to learn and you keep learning that process of sort of, you know, sitting, letting those thoughts happen and not getting, super wound up in them. And
Exactly. Yeah.
and it's the same thing with making, like, because you're going to have a lot of ideas and it's the, you can't chase after every one because that's
I mean, that's to me where the bridge between, I mean, that's where the self-knowledge of the overthinking seems super important to be able to recognize it. And
Mhm.
it's something that unless you start to build a muscle around recognition, it's not just a natural thing that you're
Right,
like, oh, now is I'm holding on too tightly. Now is the time to
right.
let go.
Yeah. And it's always too that it's not linear. And I think, again, it's very easy to get in that mindset of like, if I just keep following these steps in this particular order, then the thing will happen. And that works to a certain extent. But I think for the big idea, sometimes that just starts with a nudge or some sort of sensation where you're sort of like, well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder about that. And then like 2 months later, you're like, oh, I wonder about this. And then it's,
Mhm.
it starts kind of building on its own, but it's already clearly on your radar and taking root. So, I mean, like the simple version is, planting seeds, right? You have to, at some point, you just put the
Yeah.
seed in the ground and let it do its thing. And, you don't want to be the farmer who's pulling it up every day to see how
Don't
the roots are
overwater it.
growing.
Don't overwater it.
Yeah. So, and I think it really is a question of sort of cultivating that kind of trust in that, and not panicking, at the same time, because
One
it's
thing
easy
that
to panic.
it's so easy to panic. So easy to panic. One thing that really intrigues me about how you're describing your work is that it sounds like you need to be both big picture and sort of take in what's happening and read context clues about someone's life. And then you also need to be very detailed in thinking about the process, the details of the process and how that goes. And I'm curious about how you think of that. Does that seem true to you?
That's very true, and that's a really great way of describing it. I tend to describe it as kind of like I'm the air traffic controller. So I have to see like everything that's
Yeah.
happening in the sky, um, but also what is your flight path. But you're still the person who has to fly the plane. So it's not like I'm going to do all the work for you, um, but it is, you kind of need. It's very helpful to have that, and because it is, when you're on that trail, because you're kind of following breadcrumbs in a way.
Yes.
You need somebody along the way to be like, okay, here's the forest.
Yeah, I have a
Here's
sense, Peter, from talking to you just a very short period of time, that you're very good at what you do.
yeah, thanks.
Because I do think that this awareness of the details and this awareness of um, how to get granular with someone and understand their process, like that's, I don't often hear it described that way, but I think that feels very right in
Good.
terms of
Thank you.
how to approach it.
I think that's, that's one of the key things. And I part of the one of the things I enjoy is sort of being able to get my hands dirty on the project with somebody at the same time, because I often, for instance, like with my mentor work at the museum, it's you never want to enter into that kind of relationship as like, I have all the answers for you, or I'm the answer guy. Now go make your thing. It's more, just someone who can ask questions and sort of make that space to really explore those questions, and also be able to say like, hey, wait a second, go back like, 3 pages. I think that's the story. That's
Mm,
the really interesting thing there. But, that's also requires somebody to be very vulnerable, and it's very hard to let somebody in your process.
yeah, absolutely.
And particularly because process can be so intuitive sometimes, it's hard to talk about. And I find, with my own work, I'm a photographer, and I have a like photo meetup. We meet up once a month to talk about what we're doing, and I'm working on a project now. And kind of like you, I started it about, I don't know, 6 years ago, and my skills weren't ready for it, and I had a lot to learn, but I kind of knew what the thing was I was after. But I worked on other stuff and put it aside for a while, and I came back to it during the pandemic, and my skills caught up to what I
Mm,
was doing, and I felt like, oh, I think I know actually how to execute this
mm.
now. But I quickly discovered an avenue to it that I hadn't really thought about before, and I was like, well, crap, what's this? I thought it was going to be this one thing, but I think this is actually it. And so I was sharing some of the images in my photo meetup, and I'm like, I can't really tell you what this is yet. I think this is it, or, that I'm on the right trail. But I still can't say what that is or where this is going to be. Here are pieces of it. That's all I got. And that's all I can say.
It's almost
And
like you're trying to meet, it's like the idea is coming with its language, and here's you, and you don't
yeah,
know when that's going to meet.
right.
But one of the things it does sound like you do a lot is trying to help people articulate something that often doesn't get articulated,
Right.
which is really important, because to make sense of it and to create shape, I mean, that's what
Right.
writers do, but like
Right.
you're trying to take these blobby impressions and sort of emotions and all of the things of your life and say, I mean, that's what makes it. It's the same thing when you work in technology. I work at Pinterest and work in technology, and you have to identify the problem before you can start to build.
Absolutely.
You can't just go in there and start to build something. I mean, you can, but it doesn't work as well. So
Right.
that process of refining, what is the problem here, what is the thing we're looking to solve, what is the step to get there, that
Right.
seems like really crucial and something that a lot of people just sort of muddle through.
Right. And I think in a way they're kind of afraid to ask for help with it, or there's some embarrassment about it, or, you should be able to figure it out on your own. And my experience has been no one ever makes anything on their own. I mean, I certainly haven't.
Me
Even
too.
as a writer, like, somebody else reads it.
Yeah,
You work with an editor, you have,
great.
those trusted set of eyes to be like, cut these 3 pages. This is the thing you want to build on, that's the right sentence. You need some other point of view and some sort of guardrail just to kind of keep you focused, and on that particular trail. And there's nothing, you're still making it. I think it's just we have this sort of weird, you know myth that it's this, you're the
Solo.
solo
Solo.
person, wrestling with the muse in your
Yes.
studio, and then the bolt of lightning hits, and then you make the work and it's all great, and then then you suffer in obscurity, and then your work is famous, 100 years later. And these are all terrible ideas. And
I mean, it's the same as learning when and how to ask for help. I mean, we're
yeah,
just Americans often. I mean, I'm from the Midwest, and it's just
uh,
not something that you're sort of taught. Like,
right,
as you start to get stuck, it's okay to ask for help. It's a good thing to ask for help. It's
right,
acknowledging what needs to happen, and it's going to keep you moving.
right. Yeah,
Someone would rather sit by the side of the road than get on that bus that's going to help move
yeah,
them forward.
yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because people have so much anxiety around the word creative or
Mm,
creativity, and it brings up all sorts of stuff. And it's one of those words I'm kind of reluctant to use it, because
yeah, I understand.
people always get into that, well, I'm not creative. Like, well, that's not true. And everyone's creative in some way. And we all have some experience. And I always reference this, but there was that teacher or that sibling or someone who was like, what are you doing? Like, don't do that again.
Mm,
And then, like, you never draw a picture again
yeah,
after that.
yeah.
It's so fragile, and it's very easy to kind of drive it underground. And I think sort of one of the things I was curious about with all the work that you're doing, and sort of your conversation around anxiety in particular, it's not uncommon in my work to push up against that, because it is, people just get anxious about it, and you feel very judged, and it's hard to put something out in the world. And
It's the perfectionism too. I
yeah,
mean, when I was young, I wrote so much. I mean, there's probably a word for someone who just is always writing all the
yeah.
time. And then my first job out of college was to work with a literary agent, and then I worked in book publishing for a while. And I started working with incredible writers. I mean, I was at the publishing house that was sending one of the editors to the Nobel
Oh,
ceremony every year. And it
okay.
was incredible, right?
Yeah.
I was just a lowly assistant, but this was the house that was doing a lot of that work.
Okay.
And I just stopped writing because I felt like I'm not Günter Grass.
Right. Yeah. I'll never be
I am
good
not
enough.
Amos Oz.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I Wisława Szymborska. Like, I don't know how I'm possibly gonna write. And it was the wrong thing to think, because writing is a process. I always say this, but writing is a process as well as an outcome. And the process of writing is the same like what you're doing, where you are articulating and clarifying your space, your shape of where you are, your context,
Right.
where you are, what's happening, understanding it. And it's too bad that for so many years I just never did that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like until I understood anxiety, that's when everything made sense to me.
Right.
So yeah, I feel the same way. I'm like, I wish that weren't the case for people.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I would think if you asked any of those writers, they would also say they don't know what they're
I
doing.
know, I actually have been around some of
Yeah.
those, right? Well, Charles, man, I should not forget his name. He was such an amazing poet. But I spent time with him, and I remember him just doubting, and that's just part of the process as well. But just everyone is still just a human. They're still
Right.
just
Yeah.
themselves, and they're yeah, they agreed. They would feel
Was
as
it was it Charles Simic?
it was Charles Simic.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
was Charles Simic. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No,
Fantastic.
and I think you know, I it's not like, you want to be like, what is it, Us Magazine, where they're like stars, they're just like us. But I wished more people sort of spoke honestly about, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And I think I do sometimes, or have days where I'm like, yes, this is how to do it. But and you're familiar with your materials and your tools, but it's so connected to how you're feeling and the environment and all those things, and the potential for things to go awry
Oh my goodness.
is high.
Yeah.
And it's I worked, in live TV for like 20 years. And I'm knocking wood as I'm saying it, because I'm always like, how does this not blow up every day? Like the potential for catastrophe is enormous. And, it happens. Every show happens.
By the way, it's funny you say that. I am literally working on live programming for Pinterest right now.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the thing I'm working on is called Pinterest TV, and it's live programming.
Okay.
So it's hilarious. It's hilarious that you bring that up. But yeah, I know it is.
And yet it happens, right?
And yet it happens.
Yeah. And things, maybe some things go wrong. Nobody knows. Nobody watching knows.
Yeah. I was listening to this in-depth podcast about Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball and how revolutionary they were in selling their show and just the quality level. And one of their innovations was to get human beings inside to watch their show as they were recording it. And the studio, NBC, was like, we can't even imagine this. How are you going to bring people in? We've only been doing it this one way. And you have to bring these sets in and out, and you have to set up the lighting every time. And they just thought so differently around like people. And they were saying like, people are probably going to be farting and coughing and throwing up. And it's like, people are not as wild as that.
Yeah.
Like that it is possible to do. It's just interesting how in abstract we may fear things.
Right. Well, and also, and it's one of those funny balances of sort of like, yes, you need an awareness of what could go wrong. But I always, it's like, we can also turn that on its side and say, well, what's the awareness of what could go right?
I love that. Yeah, that's right.
And, that there's, something else is always possible. And I think at heart, I'm an optimist. Very little goes to waste in your experience. And, I'm sure the 4 or 5 years your book was sitting, all of your experience was shaping that, even if you didn't know it. And I think, it's kind of, again, sort of cultivating that trust that even if it's not immediately clear or there is not that immediate connection, it's still connected and something is still growing and it isn't a waste. I think when I look back at this photo project that I started, 5 years ago, the pictures that I made 5 years ago were the pictures I knew how to make at that time. And the skills that I had at that time were the best skills that I had at that moment in time. My skills have improved, but they would not have improved without those other skills. And it's very important to sort of keep coming back to that long view that you were always building on that. And, to sort of take that stink of failure off, because even the projects that don't work, you've learned something from them and they are valuable, and they have a lot to tell you if you can get out of the like, oh, I really fucked that up. I suck, so it's, making things isn't easy. And I think that's kind of my biggest, if I have a message, that's the one I always come back to, is that it's hard to make things, and that's okay. It doesn't mean something's wrong or that you stink or are a failure. It just means that it's hard to make things.
You have anticipated like 3 of my questions. I mean, not just this one, a couple of other times as well, because the question I was going to ask you is, what is it that you wish people would know, but you just answered it. So.
That really is, that's the biggest one. Cause I think if you can keep coming back to that it's not a failure because it's challenging, and it's not, and it's a good challenge. I think that's the other part of it. I wish there were other words, because they all sound like taking your medicine or, eating your vegetables or something, but it's, they're fun challenges, and it's really engaging to be stretched that way, and to sort of really have to be like, can I do this? I don't know. Let's find out.
I think that's the same thing with the Zorana work too, around the frustration is realizing like, oh, okay, I'm wrestling with this. it can feel hard, it can feel frustrating, but that's the process. Like
Right.
that's where I am. That's what it's supposed to be.
Right. And I think too, if we're so much, I sound like the crankiest, oldest, like in America now, this is why things are wrong. But all of our solutions are geared to the easiest side of easy now. And I'm the same as everybody. I'm like, why is this taking a fraction of a second to load up? What the hell? But that's our internet speed. Writing, making images, building a business, whatever the thing is, it takes time, and it's a slow cumulative process.
I know. I've been working on this whole idea of beautiful voyager since 2015. And I feel like I'm just really getting into the stride of it. We're 7 years.
Well, and how many moving parts do you have to keep track of?
A lot.
Yeah, so objectively, if we laid that out, like when you sat down to come up with this, I'm sure you didn't think like, here are the 4,000 moving parts I'm going to have to handle. You're like, oh, here's a good idea.
Right.
And this could be a value.
I know what I want. I know what I want to say. Like, really, that's all I had. I know what I want to say.
So, it's important to just acknowledge that part of it, and and really be kind to yourself about that, because it's, again, it's that sort of that genius idea that it's just, one day it comes to you, and then like you run to your studio and you make the thing and it's great. And maybe that happens every once in a while. I don't want to discount that, but that's not been my experience for most things. And most of the people I work with, that's not their experience too. And it's just, it's a useless pressure. I don't know why, it looks sexy in a movie, but it just doesn't work that way in life. And what we see in the movies is probably most of which doesn't work in life.
It's true.
We can all give ourselves a break in that regard.
Peter, I have loved talking to you. I am excited to include all the information about you in the notes on the podcast and on YouTube. Thank you so much for your time and wisdom.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. This is really, it just kind of flew by. I was like, 40 minutes is a long time to talk, but we just kind of.
No, it was wonderful.
So thank you.
Yes, it was wonderful to have you.